Cecily Marsh did not flinch when the Duke of Ashford called her invisible. She was standing 3 feet from him when he said it. Standing beside the sideboard in the east parlour of Ashford Hall, her hands folded in front of her, the household accounts ledger tucked under her left arm. The Duke was speaking to his estate manager, Mr. Renwick, and he was speaking about the woman who had corrected 3 years of crooked figures in 11 days. He was speaking, in other words, about Cecily. He simply did not know she was there. The last maid they sent from the village, he said, was invisible, moved through the rooms without disturbing a thing. I want the new one to be the same. Renwick's eyes slid to her. He said nothing. Cecily set the ledger on the sideboard. She set it down the way you set down something heavy, something that has been carried a long time. She said, I am the new one, your Grace. The Duke of Ashford turned. He was not what the village said he was. The village said feared. The village said cold, said ruinous, said that he had driven his last 3 estate managers to resignation by sheer silence. What Cecily saw was a man who had not expected to be corrected. He was perhaps 35, dark-haired, dressed plainly for a man of his rank, and his expression had the quality of a room in which all the furniture has just been rearranged by someone else. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not apologize. He did not dismiss her. He looked at the ledger on the sideboard, and then he looked at her, and for one fraction of 1 second something moved through his eyes that was not cold at all. He said, Say that one more time. She said it one more time. I am the new one, your Grace. That was the spring of 1843. Dorset, England, the Hall, the Park, the disputed northern drainage field, and a set of household accounts that had been bled dry for 3 years by a man everyone trusted. If the first hour of this story already has your attention, subscribe to the channel. This one is only getting started. Cecily had not come to Ashford Hall looking for justice. She had come looking for work. The distinction mattered to her. She had turned it over carefully during the 2-mile walk from the village that morning, her boots deliberate on the chalk path, the April sky the colour of pewter. Justice was for people with standing, with solicitors, with names that were written in books. What Cecily had was arithmetic. She had her mother's teaching, her own 12 years of household service, and a habit of reading a column of figures 3 times before she accepted what it said. She had, in the past, been thanked for this habit by exactly no one. She had also, in the past, used it to save 4 households from ruin, without ever being introduced as the reason they were saved. This was not injustice, she had decided. It simply was what it was. She was 27 years old. Her father had been a village schoolmaster who died when she was 15, leaving her a shelf of books, a sound education, and 16 shillings. Her mother had died the following winter. She had been in service since the age of 16, had been promoted to head housemaid at 19, had been asked to leave a comfortable position at Whitwell House at 24, when the eldest son decided to do what eldest sons sometimes decided to do. She had not cried when they dismissed her, though she had been given no formal reason, and only a week's wages in lieu of notice. She had not cried in the cart back to her cousin's house. She had counted backwards from 10. When she reached 1, she had felt precisely the same as when she had reached 10, but her hands were steadier. She was not unfeeling. That was a different thing. The post of housemaid at Ashford Hall had been advertised twice. The first woman who took it had lasted a fortnight. The second had lasted 9 days. The village said it was the Duke. The village said he watched too closely, spoke too little, expected things no reasonable man expected, and that the hall itself had an atmosphere, a heaviness, a grief that had lived in the walls since his wife died 4 years ago and had never entirely left. Cecily had weighed these accounts. She had decided that most of them described a man she could work for. A man who expected things was a man who noticed things. She had spent 11 years working for men who noticed nothing, and it had brought her here. She had also noticed, while the housekeeper, Mrs. Frey, was outlining her duties on the first morning, that the household ledger was £216 wrong. Not by accident, not by carelessness. There is a pattern to careless arithmetic and a different pattern to deliberate arithmetic, and Cecily had learned to tell them apart before she was 20. This was the second kind. The figures had been fiddled with the patience of someone who expected no one would check, which meant someone had checked before and found nothing, which meant the someone had been very careful. She did not say this to Mrs. Frey, she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Frey. I will need the previous 3 years' ledgers as well, when it is convenient." Mrs. Frey looked at her with the cautious expression of a woman who has learned not to ask follow-up questions. She brought the ledgers the next morning. 11 days later, Cecily had a figure. £216 in the current year, running back to a beginning sum of 412 3 years ago, compounding in small increments across wages, provisions and candle accounts. Total, £847, taken in increments small enough to be invisible unless you were looking for them, which no one had been, because the man who kept the books was the man everyone trusted. Mr. Renwick, she had set the ledger on the sideboard. She had stood there, invisible, while the Duke of Ashford told his estate manager he wanted a housemaid who moved through rooms without disturbing a thing, and then she had said her name, in effect by saying what she was, and the Duke had turned. He had looked at her for a long moment. He had not dismissed her. He had said, "Say that one more time," in the tone of a man who has been given a piece of information he did not expect, and is deciding, carefully, whether it is true. She had said it one more time. What she did not know then was what that turn had cost him. She found out later. Months later, when enough had happened that he could say it plainly, he told her that in the 4 years since his wife died, not one person had corrected him in his own house. Not one. Mrs. Frey moved around him. The footman moved around him. Renwick managed him, smoothly, the way you manage something you need to keep pointing in a useful direction. And he had felt it. He was not stupid. He had felt himself become a direction. He simply had not known how to stop moving. He was not cold. He was tired. That was the distinction. She did not know any of this on that first morning. What she knew was that when he said, "Say that one more time," his voice was not angry. It was something she recognized. It was the voice of someone who has been startled into actual attention. She picked up the ledger. She set it in front of him, open to the provisions column, Year 1. "This is what I came to discuss," she said, "when you are ready." He looked at the ledger. He looked at her. He said, "Who sent you?" "No one," she said. I answered the advertisement. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the suggestion of what a smile would be if he decided to let it. She noted it the way she noted a figure that did not add up, filed it, moved on. "Renwick," he said. Renwick had not moved from the side of the room. Cecily had not looked at him since she set the ledger down. She looked at him now. He was a compact, pleasant-faced man of perhaps 50, with a manner that was always slightly more solicitous than the situation required. He was looking at the ledger. "I will review the accounts today," the Duke said. That was all. He said it to Renwick the way you say a thing when you are not yet certain what the thing means, but you mean to find out. Renwick said, "Of course, Your Grace," and left the room without hurrying, which was, Cecily knew, the one way you could hurry without being seen. She watched him go. The Duke watched her watching him. "You know what you found," he said. "I believe so," she said. "I would like to show you rather than tell you. If you will permit me 1 hour." 1 hour later, the Duke of Ashford had not smiled. But the ghost at the corner of his mouth had made a second appearance, and this time it stayed a beat longer before it left. He said, "You counted all of this in 11 days. "I count quickly," she said. "You are a housemaid, I am." She folded her hands. "The two are not mutually exclusive." He said nothing for a moment. He turned a page. He turned another. The fire in the grate was the only sound. "Mrs. Frey is protective of the household accounts. Yes, you went around her." "I asked her for the ledgers," Cecily said. "She brought them." "That is not going around her." She paused. "I would have gone around her if I'd had to. But I didn't have to." He looked up. "You are very precise," he said. "It is useful," she said. That ghost moved at the corner of his mouth again. He pressed it down. She watched him press it down. She thought, "You have been doing that for 4 years, and you are not as good at it as you think." She did not say this. He turned back to the ledger. April became May. May became a long bright June, in which Cecily remade the household accounts from the ground up, and the Duke of Ashford appeared in the study doorway at 7 in the morning on 3 separate occasions to ask a question he had clearly been holding since the night before. The first question was about the drainage field on the northern boundary. The second question was about the candle suppliers, specifically whether Renwick's preferred supplier was priced fairly against the market. The third question was about a letter she had found misfiled in the back of the accounts book, a letter she had set aside and not yet mentioned. She told him about the candle supplier first. The short answer was no, it was not priced fairly, and hadn't been for 2 years, and she had already written to 2 alternative suppliers for comparison quotes. He looked at her for a long moment, with the careful expression she was coming to recognise as his version of being impressed. "You wrote in my name," he said. "I wrote in the household's name," she said. "I was careful about it. I see that." He looked at the letter she had drafted. Then he said, "What about the drainage field?" She told him about the drainage field. It was a 40-minute conversation, conducted over a map pinned to the study table, during which they stood side by side and she indicated, with a pencil, 4 places where the field had been misread in the survey, and 1 place where the misreading was too consistent to be accidental. He said, "The survey was done by Renwick's cousin." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You have been thorough. I have been paying attention," she said. "You said you wanted someone who moved through rooms without disturbing a thing. I move through rooms. I pay attention." He said, "I did not know you were in the room." "No," she said. He looked at the map for a moment. Then he said, "What about the letter?" She brought the letter. It was written in the hand of the previous estate manager, a man named Allard, who had retired 5 years ago, and it was addressed to the Duke, and it had never been sent. It described, in plain and careful language, a pattern of irregular withdrawals from the household fund, and it named the person responsible. The letter was dated 4 months before Allard's retirement. The Duke read the letter once. He set it down. He left, he said, without saying anything. He wrote the letter, Cecily said. He never sent it. No, she looked at the letter. I think he was afraid. The Duke said nothing. He looked at the window. The park was green, and still in the June light. He had worked here for 22 years, he said at last. Yes, she said. I imagine that was precisely the problem. He turned and looked at her, not the inventory look she had come to expect, the careful taking stock. Something else. Something that sat slightly behind his eyes and was harder to name. Why are you telling me this? He said. She understood that he was not asking the obvious question. He was asking the other one. Why are you doing this when it is not your position, not your responsibility, not something you were engaged to do, when it would be simpler and safer to keep your head down and move through rooms without disturbing a thing? She said, because the numbers are wrong. And I cannot unknow a number once I have seen it. He said nothing. She said, I am not doing this for you, Your Grace. I am doing it because it is true, and I know how to show it. Those are different reasons. He said, yes, he said it quietly. They are. The midsummer dinner at Ashford Hall was the first formal occasion Cecily had occasion to observe from the servants' passage. The county came. 31 people in the dining room. The long table candle-lit, the silverware that she had catalogued and found 2 pieces short of what the inventory listed. She was not in the room. She was in the passage that ran behind the wall, which was where the household staff moved during a formal dinner, quiet as weather. Lady Forsyth found her in the hallway afterward. Lady Forsyth was the county's leading social authority, which was a kind of authority that Cecily had learned to treat the way you treat a strong current. You did not fight it. You noted where it was moving, and you moved perpendicular. You are the housemaid, Lady Forsyth said. Yes, my lady. I understand you have been reorganising the household accounts. She said this with the smile of a woman who has just said something with a sharper thing beneath it. I have been correcting the household accounts, Cecily said. Reorganising implies they were correct to begin with. Lady Forsyth blinked. The household is 12% more efficient than it was in January, Cecily said. The candle account alone reduced by £31 in the last quarter. The drainage field on the northern boundary has been resurveyed, and the corrected boundary adds 11 acres to the estate's productive land. These are not my accomplishments. They are simply what happened when the figures were looked at carefully. She said it the way you read a column of figures aloud. Not unkindly, not with pleasure, just plainly. The hallway was quiet for a moment. Well, Lady Forsyth said. Cecily inclined her head and went back to work. She did not know the Duke had been standing at the end of the hall until she turned the corner and found him there. He had a glass in his hand that he appeared to have forgotten. He was looking at her with the expression she had first seen in the east parlour, the expression of a man who has been given a piece of information he did not expect. That was not invisible, he said. No, she said. It was not. He said nothing. The ghost moved at the corner of his mouth. This time he did not press it down entirely. It stayed for 2 full seconds before he turned and walked back toward the dining room. She noted it, filed it, went back to the accounts. What came next arrived on a Thursday. Renwick had been quiet since the morning she had set the ledger on the sideboard. Pleasant quiet. The kind of quiet that looks like a man who has decided to be helpful. He had answered her questions about the provision suppliers with great specificity. He had produced, when she asked, a full inventory of the estate's timber contracts. He had been, in other words, exactly as cooperative as a man would be if he understood that cooperation was the only armour left to him. She had not stopped watching the numbers. She had not told him this. She had simply continued to pay attention, because that was what she did. The timber contract was the second thread. She found it on a Tuesday, in a sub-ledger that Renwick had not offered, and that she had asked for obliquely, through a request about the winter fuel allocation. The contract named a supplier called Fortis Timber at a rate 14% above the county average. The contract had been renewed each year for 6 years, in the estate's name, by the estate manager. There was no record that the Duke had reviewed or signed any renewal after the first year. There was a record, in a separate column that had been added to the ledger, in a hand that was Renwick's but subtly different from his usual hand, of a discount received from Fortis Timber. The discount was 8%. It went, as far as Cecily could tell, to an account she had not yet traced. 8% of the timber contract across 6 years was £4,312. She wrote the number down. She wrote it the way you write something you have counted 3 times and found the same each time. She set the paper in the back of the locked drawer in the study, behind the correspondence file she had reorganised in May. She had 7 copies. They were in 7 different places. This was, she had decided, a reasonable precaution. She said nothing about any of this to the Duke that week, or the next. She needed one more document, and she was waiting for it to arrive. What arrived instead on the Thursday was a letter. It was delivered to Mrs. Frey and passed to Cecily, which was irregular, which was why Cecily noticed it. It was addressed to her in a hand she did not recognise. It contained 2 sentences. The first said that she was to understand her position here was temporary. The second said that the Railway Commissioner's office in Dorchester was looking for an administrative assistant, and that she would find the work more suitable to a woman of her background. It was not signed. She read it twice. She set it on the desk. She looked at it for exactly 10 seconds. Then she went and found the Duke. He was in the north paddock, which was where he went on Thursday mornings, and which she knew because she had paid attention. He was standing at the fence, looking at a boundary marker that 2 weeks ago had been in the wrong place. It was now in the correct place, which she knew because she had arranged for it to be moved, based on the reserve she had commissioned in the estate's name. She handed him the letter. She said, "This came this morning." He read it. His face was still while he read it. He said, "This is unsigned. Yes, the Railway Commissioner's office is not hiring. I assumed not." He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "Someone wants you gone." "Yes," she said. "Someone who knows I am no longer only correcting the household accounts." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will handle Renwick." She looked at him. "You will not." He looked up. "I have 7 copies of everything I have found," she said. "I have the original Fortis contract. I have the sub-ledger. I have the calculations checked 3 times, and I have a copy of this letter. You handling Renwick without the documentation will cost you in court if it comes to that, and I believe it will come to that." She paused. "I am not asking you to step back. I am asking you to let me do this in the order that makes it hold." He looked at her for a long moment. The paddock was very quiet. "You have been planning this. I have been preparing," she said. "Those are different things." That ghost moved again at the corner of his mouth. This time it almost reached his eyes. "All right," he said. "I need 2 more weeks," she said. "You have them." She turned to go. He said, "Miss Marsh." It was the first time he had used her name. She turned back. He said, "Who taught you this?" She thought about it. "My father taught me figures," she said. "The rest I learned by watching what happened when no one checked." He nodded. He looked back at the boundary marker, now in the correct place. "I should have checked," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have." She paused. "You are checking now." She went back to the accounts. 2 weeks became 10 days. The document she had been waiting for arrived from the County Land Registry on a Wednesday morning. It was the original survey of the Fortis Timber Access Road, commissioned 6 years ago, signed by a surveyor whose name was the same as Renwick's mother's maiden name, and it showed a boundary she had already demonstrated was inaccurate by the thickness of a pencil line and the weight of 4,312 pounds. She wrote to the magistrate's office that afternoon. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of September. Renwick moved first. He always did, and Cecily had counted on this. 2 days before the hearing, a letter arrived at the hall addressed to the Duke of Ashford from a firm of London solicitors representing one Mr. Bernard Renwick, estate manager, alleging that certain household documents had been handled improperly by a member of the domestic staff and demanding their return. Alongside the letter arrived, through a different post, a short piece in the county newsletter suggesting that a recent resurgence of confidence in Ashford Hall's accounts might owe more to the Duke's personal interest in a particular domestic employee than to any demonstrable competence on that employee's part. Cecily read both documents. She set them on the desk beside each other. She thought, "He has used 2 weapons and both of them are paper." She thought, "This is what I prepared for." She went to find Mrs. Frey. Mrs. Frey had been watching all of this for 5 months, with the expression of a woman who has survived a great many things by keeping her head below the line of fire. She looked at Cecily when Cecily entered the kitchen. She said, "Well?" "I need you to remember," Cecily said, "who brought me the ledgers in April." Mrs. Frey was quiet for a moment. "You asked me for them," she said. "I brought them. That is what happened." "Yes," Cecily said. "That is exactly what happened." Mrs. Frey held her gaze. Then she said, "Hold your head up," in the way that meant several things at once, and turned back to the stove. The hearing was held in the county magistrate's office on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week of September. It was not a trial. It was a formal inquiry, which is a different thing, though the room had the feeling of something that had been building for a long time and was now finally being allowed to arrive. The magistrate, a Mr. Crow, was a man of perhaps 60 with ink-stained fingers and the manner of someone who has listened to a great many versions of the truth and developed a very precise method for distinguishing them. He sat at the head of the table. Renwick sat to his left, with a solicitor from the London firm. Cecily sat across from them with the ledgers, the Fortis contract, the surveyor's record, the sub-ledger, the 7 copies, and a carefully indexed summary she had written out in a clean hand the night before. She was not nervous. She was steady. She had found over the years that those were not the same thing, but they served the same purpose. The solicitor spoke first. He was smooth and fast, and he said, in several different ways, that the documents had been obtained by an unauthorised party, that their provenance was uncertain, that the calculations were complex and required expert verification, and that the character of the primary witness was subject to certain professional concerns he would be happy to address. Cecily waited. Miss Crow looked at her when the solicitor finished. He said, "Miss Marsh?" She stood. She said, "The ledgers were provided to me by the household housekeeper at my request, in the ordinary course of household account review. The sub-ledger was provided at my request through a written request for the winter fuel allocation, which is a standard household document. The surveyor's record was obtained from the County Land Registry by registered request, a copy of which I have here. The calculations have been verified twice by myself and once by a certified land agent in Dorchester, whose signed statement is on page 4 of the summary. The figure is £4,312, drawn from the estate's fund over 6 years and directed to an account in the name of Fortis Timber, which is registered to a holding company in whose directors' list you will find the name of a W. Renwick of Sherborne, who is the brother of the estate manager." She set the summary in front of Mr. Crow. She set the original documents alongside it. She sat down. Renwick's solicitor said, "I must object to the characterization." Mr. Crow raised one hand. He was reading the summary. He turned to page 4. He turned to page 7. He said, "Mr. Renwick." Renwick looked at the table. Mr. Crow said, "Is the holding company yours?" Renwick said, "After a long moment, I had intended to repay the full amount." "That is not what I asked," Mr. Crow said. The room was quiet. Renwick's solicitor leaned close and said something in a low voice. Renwick nodded. Once he said, "I would like to discuss an arrangement." Cecily looked at the window. The September light came through it clean and level. £4,312, said the column in her head. 847 before that, a letter with no signature, a survey done by a man whose name matched a name in a ledger, a pattern of small, patient, invisible takings, running for 6 years, from a man who had expected that no one would check. She had checked. The arrangement took 3 weeks to finalise. Renwick resigned. He made full restitution from his personal assets, which were, it turned out, considerable. He did not go to trial, because the magistrate determined that full restitution and a permanent bar from acting as an estate agent in the county constituted adequate remedy, and Cecily had no objection to this. She was not interested in his ruin. She was interested in the numbers being correct. The Duke signed the document of restitution on a Thursday morning, in the study, where, 5 months earlier, she had set a ledger on a sideboard and told him who she was. He signed it with the kind of deliberateness of a man who has thought carefully about what he is signing. And then he set the pen down, and he looked at her. £4,312, he said, and 8%, she said, and 8%, he agreed. He looked at the document. "Then," he said, "Mrs. Frey told me what she said to you, before the hearing." "Hold your head up," Cecily said. "Yes, it is good advice," she said. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she was aware of it, aware of the quality of it, the way his attention settled rather than scanned. Outside the window the September park was going gold at the edges. She had been here 6 months. She had corrected £847 and then 4,000 more, and she had resurveyed a drainage field and replaced 2 timber suppliers and written 37 letters in the estate's name, and turned down, quietly, twice, the opportunity to accept a sum of money from him directly that he had framed as a bonus and that she had known was something else. She had turned it down the second time by saying, "I am not here because I could not afford to leave." He had said, "I know that." She had said, "Then you understand why I will not take it." He had looked at her for a long time that time too. "Now," he said, "I understand now what you meant." She said, "About leaving? About being here because you chose it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I did not choose this. I was here. I remained because going seemed like more effort than staying. And then I remained because—" He stopped. He looked at the window, because the boundary marker was moved to the right place, and the candle account came in £31 under. And someone said, "Say that one more time in my own hall," and I turned around. She was very still. He said, "I am not asking you to stay for the estate." She said, "What are you asking?" He looked at her. "I am asking if you intend to." It was not the question she had expected. She had expected something grander, or something more guarded. She had not expected the plainest version of the thing. She stood with it for a moment. She looked at the ledger on the desk, now corrected, balanced, running to the penny. She said, "You should know that I will continue to correct you when the numbers are wrong. I am counting on it," he said, "and I will not be managed." "No," he said, "I had worked that out." The ghost moved at the corner of his mouth. This time she watched it come all the way. This time, for the first time, it arrived. He smiled, slowly, like a thing that has been kept back a long time and is finally being let through. She watched it happen. She thought, "There it is." She thought, "I have been waiting to see if that was there." She said, "Then I intend to stay." He said, "Good." He said it quietly, the way you say a thing you have been waiting to say and are not willing to perform. She looked at the ledger. She looked at him. She thought, "I am not staying because I need to. I am staying because this is true. Those are different reasons, and both of them are mine." She picked up the pen. She made the final notation in the corrected accounts. September 1843, balance confirmed, £4,312 recovered, figures verified in triplicate. She set the pen down. He reached across the desk and took her hand. Not urgently. Deliberately, the way you do a thing you have thought about carefully and decided to do plainly. She let him. Outside the window the park went gold and still in the afternoon light. The years after that were not quiet. They were good, which is a different thing. The drainage field on the northern boundary, properly surveyed and properly drained, produced its first full harvest in 1845. The yield exceeded the county average by 11%. Cecily recorded this in the accounts with her usual precision, though she noted in the margin, in her own hand, a single word: "Finally." The timber contract was renegotiated with a Dorchester supplier who had been in business for 30 years, and whose prices were, by Cecily's calculation, 13% fairer than Fortie's had ever been. She calculated this on a Sunday morning at the study table, while he read beside her and handed her pages without being asked, which was how she knew they had become the kind of people who worked well beside each other. Lady Forsyth called in the spring of 1844. She called officially, with her card, and was received in the parlour, and she said to Cecily, who was now the Duchess of Ashford and still kept the household accounts in her own hand, "I understand the estate is quite recovered." Cecily said, "Yes." Lady Forsyth said, "I may have been." She stopped. She tried again. "I did not originally understand." "No," Cecily said. "You did not." She poured the tea. "Would you like to understand now?" Lady Forsyth looked at her. She said, after a moment, "I believe I would." It was the beginning of a slow and somewhat startled friendship. Renwick retired to the coast. He did not prosper, but he was not destroyed. And in the summer of 1847 he wrote a letter to the Duke that was 3 paragraphs long, and contained, in its last paragraph, an acknowledgement he had been composing in various forms for 4 years. The Duke read the letter, and then passed it to Cecily. She read it once. She set it in the correspondence file under R. She did not write back. She thought about it and decided she did not need to. The letter was enough. The accounts were balanced. That was the whole of it. The school opened in 1848. It was Cecily's, formally in her own name. Registered in the county record as the Marsh School for the Education of Working Women, Dorset, it ran arithmetic. It ran household management, reading, letter writing, and once a month a session on account keeping that Cecily led herself, every month for 11 years. She sat at the front of the room and said, "Read the column 3 times. If it says the same thing 3 times, accept it. If it says something different, ask why. The answer is always in the numbers, if you are willing to look." She had 9 students in the first year. She had 41 in the 4th. In 1853, the county commissioner visited on behalf of the Education Authority and spent 2 hours in the school, and then sat with Cecily in the parlour at the hall and asked how she had begun it. She told him about the subledger. She told him about the survey. She told him about the letter with no signature, and the 7 copies, and the day she had set a ledger on a sideboard, and told a man who had called her invisible that she was standing right there. The commissioner said, "Were you frightened?" She thought about it carefully. She said, "I was not frightened. I was certain." Those are different things. The old head housemaid Mrs. Frey retired in 1851. With a full pension and a cottage on the south end of the estate, which she had been offered twice previously, and had refused on both occasions because she was not finished yet. She accepted it the 3rd time on the condition that Cecily come for tea on Wednesdays. Cecily came for tea on Wednesdays. Mrs. Frey continued, in retirement, to deliver blunt one-line verdicts on the county, the weather, and occasionally on Cecily, which Cecily continued to receive as the kind of advice that was actually love. The hall prospered. The park prospered. The drainage field yielded well in every year except 1849, which was a bad year for drainage fields across the county, and Cecily noted this in the margin of the accounts without commentary, because the weather did not require her commentary, only her record. In the autumn of 1854, she sat at the study table, the same table where 11 years earlier she had set down a ledger and changed the direction of several things, and she read back through the accounts from the beginning, from April 1843 to September 1854. She read them as she always read them, 3 times to be sure. They were correct, every column, every figure, every margin note in her hand, finally. Verified, confirmed, recovered, she set the ledger down. He was reading at the other end of the table. He did not look up. He passed her the next page the way he did. She took it. She thought, this is what it looks like, in the actual columns, not the thing you were promised or the thing you were refused, the thing you built, figure by figure, choice by choice, because the numbers were wrong and you could not unknow them once you had seen them. She thought, I am Cecily Marsh. I have been Cecily Ashford for 11 years, and I am Cecily Marsh still. I did not come here for rescue. I did not come here for a name. I came here because the figures did not add up, and I was the one who knew how to make them right. That was the whole of it. And it was enough. And it was everything. She chose it every time she picked up the pen. She was choosing it now. She turned the page. She built that choice into the ledger, year after year, and the ledger into a school, and the school into a county record, and the county record into something that would still be there long after the figures had been forgotten, and only the fact of the thing remained, that a woman had walked 2 miles down a chalk path one April morning, because the numbers were wrong, and she had stood in a room and said her name, and everything that followed was her own. She knew who she was. She had always known. It simply took a ledger, and a stubborn silence, and a man learning to stay still long enough to see her before the world was reminded of it. If this story landed for you the way it was meant to, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew he finally saw her? Was it when he said her name, or earlier, when he turned around in that east parlour and could not look away? And wherever you are watching from, drop your city below. I want to know how far Cecily's story has travelled. Another one is already waiting for you, and I will see you there.